Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, on the 5th of May, 2018, my name is Adrian Lloyd, and this is just my stupid opinion.
You profit from fear and hate, hoarding wealth and amassing power. The walls have been unleashed. We will not submit or cower. It's humanity's darkest side. We are ruled by thieves and liars.
So, I want to start off today just by giving a few thoughts on the free expression panel that took place in Ottawa on Thursday, May 3rd. And so, the free expression panel that took place, I only found out about it a couple days beforehand, actually. It was a tweet that was put out by Dr. Rick Mehta. And so this free speech panel, it was saying how Lindsay Shepherd was there, who people will remember from the Laurier incident just a few months ago. And then there was also Dr. Christopher DiCarlo who was there, and also Professor Henry Beisel. And I gotta admit that was unfamiliar with Henry Beisel and Christopher DiCarlo before this event took place, but I didn't know who Lindsay Shepherd was and Rick Mehta. So one of the reasons that I went was actually, while Lindsay Shepherd was was probably the star attraction that would bring people in. A lot of people know her story. For me, it was actually the fact that Rick Mehta was going was what piqued my interest, because him and I have interacted many times. He was on my show at the beginning of this year, which is when we first met, and since then we've kept in contact with each other, sending each other messages, just seeing how each other's doing. And it was kind of cool because this was the first time that I actually got a chance to meet him in person. We had many interactions from the opposite end of a computer screen, but this was the first time that we were actually put face to face. I got to shake his hand. We got to actually talk a little bit in person. It was a good time. And I really enjoyed all the other speakers that were there. I did end up uploading the audio, although I was very limited on the video that I had, because my cell phone did not have a lot of memory, so I was very limited on what I could record there. And I ended up just recording the audio onto my iPod while I was there, so that's why I managed to capture all that very limited video. But it was a good speech, and for anybody who missed it, it's too bad, because it was a good interaction. There was learned a lot there, and actually one thing I noticed when I was there is I noticed about half of the people that were sitting in the audience were taking notes, actually. So that was, for me, when I was looking at how successful this panel was. They had a pretty full auditorium, but on top of that, half of the people were taking notes on what they said, which goes to show that these people had very important messages to bring. And actually, Rick Mehta was mentioning to me that that was actually his very first panel, and he didn't really come with much prepared, so he was more going off the cuff. And despite this, he did a great job, I thought. At the beginning he was telling his story, and then from there he managed to branch off and go a little more into what he's knowledgeable about, what he knows, what he's experienced. So it was a very good time. I got a quick opportunity to just kind of say a few words to Lindsay Shepherd, just a quick little, good job. You were great up there, but it was getting late in the end of the night, so I didn't want to take up too much of her time, especially because I'm pretty sure she had been driving most of the day in order to get there, and then was pretty much, as soon as she got there, was right into the panel. So I think by the end of the whole thing, after about a good 3 hours, she was a little done with her day. I'm hoping, though, that I managed to get the card of Henry Beisel, so I'm hoping that I can talk to him. He'd be willing to come on to the channel and be willing to give some of his ideas forward. We'll see how that goes. I haven't contacted him yet, but I plan to do that soon. So if he's willing to come on, that would be awesome. He's a professor with over 30 years experience, and even though he was just getting out, he said in the panel he was just getting out of academia when all this took place, when everything was starting to get politicized in the universities, while many of the others, Rick Mehta and Christopher DiCarlo, they were pretty much just getting into it when the politicization was going on. And they both had their careers affected through this process. So if you get the opportunity to go watch it, it's a really good panel. I highly recommend that people go watch it, not just because it's my own video. But from there, let's move on into the main stories of the day. So, as we all know, what's been going on for some time, Canada's been having its border crisis, where we've been having a number of people that have been coming across the U.S. border trying to claim asylum. Now, first off, I wanted to address is people are talking about how the biggest problem right now is the agreement, because many people are looking towards the safe third country agreement between Canada and America to try and stem some of the people coming across our borders, because we're reaching a crisis point now, even though our government doesn't want to say it. It's getting to the point, if it hasn't passed now, we are receiving almost as many illegal asylum claims as legal asylum claims. In fact, by now, it may have actually passed, and we have received more illegal asylum claims in Canada in 2018 than legal. You know you've got a problem when. But many people are looking at the wording in the Safe Third Country Agreement, which states that a person who is coming to North America, they have to claim asylum with the first country they enter. So if it's America, they got to claim with America. They can't claim it in Canada. However, many are looking how there seems to be a loophole in this agreement where this claim of asylum has to be made at an official boarding crossing. So what many are looking to now when they're showing the problems, many are looking to now when they're trying to show the problems with the Safe Third Country Agreement is the fact that it's at official border crossing, when many of the asylum seekers are coming across unofficial border crossings. And we're going to get a little bit more into that part. We're going to get a little bit of that part in a few minutes. But the main problem right now is the fact that in Toronto, we've been hearing about right now 30% of all people inside homeless shelters are asylum seekers. 30%. By the end of the summer, they're projecting 50% of the people in homeless shelters are asylum seekers. So we're not really doing well in housing them. I mean, we shouldn't have to house all these people that come across anyway and look after them anyway. There's supposed to be a process in place for this, but our government has not done much to actually fix it. And it's getting to the point where now the the Toronto City Councillors and the Government of Ontario, and along with the federal government, are trying to encourage citizens to take in these refugee claimants. As it says here, one agency asked neighbors and supporters to provide temporary housing for asylum seekers. Yeah, that's going to end well. But yeah, it says here, at one Toronto refugee shelter, a family with 4 kids was asked to give up one of their 2 rooms for a newly arrived family so both could have a roof over their heads. Because this is the point we're at. We can't even house all these people. This is what happens when you are unprepared. For a long time, Canadians and Americans, we didn't really put much stock into our border, you know? We were lucky, in fact. Especially here in Canada, we have one of the longest unprotected borders in the world. But we were lucky to have it right next to such a great ally like America, where we didn't have to worry really about our border. I mean, sure, illegal border crossings happen both ways, whether it be Canadians going into America or Americans coming into Canada. But these would be maybe a couple dozen cases a year at best, and most of the time it was just people crossing the border who would then just get sent back home. It wasn't a big deal. It's not like they were trying to move in and stay. Sure, there was a few times that was the case, but more often than not, they were just they were crossing into the other side for whatever reasons. I'm sure for some Canadians, they crossed over because they wanted to go shopping or something. But now, ever since then, over the last year, ever since our goddamn dumbass Prime Minister put out that tweet saying, "Welcome to Canada, everybody's invited if you're seeking persecution, if you're seeking refuge from persecution." Well, because of that, we have this huge migrant crossing across the border. Now, the thing about this that makes it even more unacceptable is the fact that we're trying to, especially when we're talking on the international community stage, they're trying to present as if these are people fleeing persecution. But where are they coming from? They're coming from America, which is the richest, most prosperous country in the world. The country that has some of the most rights ever but these people are trying to claim prosecution is why they are leaving. But there's absolutely no reason this makes sense. Many of them who are in there that are claiming that they're leaving due to persecution don't even have a proper visa. So they're not even in the country properly. It's sure many of them had the temporary protective status that had taken away, but that is a temporary protective status. It means it's not permanent. And if that status is taken away, you have to go through the official process to get a visa or apply for your citizenship, but these are not what the people are doing. They are crossing the border. So we have a number of them that don't have proper registration in America, but are crossing over anyway. And then on top of that, we have people that are actually going to America to cross into Canada. They are going to America, and their whole point is to then make the crossing into Canada. How unacceptable is this? I mean, this is literally going against what the Safe Third Country Agreement is supposed to stand for. So we already have that. We have the government that is unwilling to admit their responsibilities they played in this crisis and are doing next to nothing in order to actually fix the problem. Our government has spent time and time and time again blaming the Harper government for this crossing, which doesn't even make sense considering everything that took place years after Harper was out of office. Like, it was well over a year, so there's absolutely no way that Harper had any stock in this, or what his government had any stock in this border crisis. But that's what Trudeau and his Liberals have been trying to play on. They've been trying to blame the Harper game. However, they apparently have a new strategy now. On top of this, they're now, instead of taking responsibility, and instead of blaming Harper and his conservative government, now they are blaming Trump. That's right, Justin Trudeau is blaming Trump for the real problem that we're having right now at the border. Oh, I gotta switch this over. Hold on. There we go. So as it states down here, there it is. According to Reuters, a Canadian official familiar with the matter told Reuters that the Canadian wants to amend a bilateral agreement to allow it to block border crossing refugee claimants, but that the United States is not cooperating. Now, it is possible that the United States is not cooperating quite to the extent that they want. First of all, we don't need the U.S. to cooperate in order to fix this problem. Second of all, when this situation got underway, at the very least, the American border guards did try to help in some way. They were trying to let the Canadian officials know when they saw migrants crossing. They were trying to help. However, since then, probably not too much stock has been placed in it, for, at least in terms of America, for good reasons. If we're looking at it if we are Americans, then it's for good reasons, because they have enough problems as it is. And now, many of the people that have taken this temporary protective status from, many of the people who have in the past been a burden on their system, are now coming to Canada. So for them, they probably don't have a real big reason why they want to solve it. In fact, when they have their own problems, like the caravan approaching, well, I guess not approaching, it's arrived at the U.S. border wall in the south, then it kind of makes sense that maybe people leaving their country is not their biggest concern. But what they're talking about, and actually it even states right below, it says Trudeau says border discussions have been going on for months with the Trump government. However, again, we don't need the Americans to agree with us in order to solve this problem. See, what they want to do is they're trying to amend the Safe Third Country Agreement. They want to amend it so that way it doesn't just apply to a border crossing, to a official border crossing. But even Michelle Rempel, the conservative critic for immigration, she has already laid out what needs to be done in order to solve this issue. All that needs to be done is Canada needs to recognize its entire border as an official border crossing. If that was to happen, then the Canadian officials, the border crossing officials, the RCMP, they literally could reject many of these asylum seekers for that reason. Because if we, as our country, recognize the whole entire area as an official border crossing, which we really should, I mean, the entire, to say that there's no official along our border, the whole entire thing is not an official boarding crossing, I think is a little bit ridiculous. I don't even mean that just for Canada, but in general, if other countries hold that idea that not every part of their border is an official boarding crossing, then it's a ridiculous idea to have. On top of this, actually, what I see as the problem too is while there is this loophole in the safe third country agreement, there is this loophole, but at the same time, the one thing that is even in the UN has declared is that when asylum seekers and refugees enter into another one's country, they are forced to abide by that country's law. Now, I think this could actually be used as a defense when we're talking about our border wall, because they're by going across a non-official boarding crossing, then they've proven that they don't have respect for Canadian rule of law. Now, again, this is where the water gets a little bit murky, because the UN says that you can't punish an asylum seeker who crosses your border illegally if they are just because they did that, because they're not offered protection by their home state, and they might be fleeing persecution, so they may have reasons to cross their border for the sake of their lives. But this is not the case in America. In fact, if America is considered a country where people can flee from due to persecution, then Canadians can flee to Americans for the same reason. America, like I said before, is already a freer country, and I think underneath our current leader, we could actually have a lot more reasons to show that they tend to persecute its own citizens, or at least treat their citizens as a second class, like born citizens as a second class citizen. Many Canadians I've been talking to more and more recently are starting to feel that way in their own country. And you shouldn't feel like a second class citizen in your own country, but this is exactly what Trudeau has made many people feel. I think last year we ended up admitting 50,000 asylum seekers, which we have not had a number this high since the early 2000s, and I believe that was just after 9/11 when that ended up happening. But there has been no crisis of the sort in America. Nobody can claim this sort of persecution that they're trying to claim. We have Hondurans, we have Haitians that are coming across. Well, both were offered temporary protective status. And that, again, like I've said, that is temporary protective status that can eventually be taken away, and it will eventually one day get taken away. But then you cannot claim persecution for that. At the same time, if you want to bring up the travel ban that Trump has been trying to implement, well, once again, you can't claim it as being directly against your group of people, because what people are trying to say, it's a Muslim ban. Well, it's only banning a minority of Muslims from a country, and it's not specifically saying anything to do with their religion. It has to do with where their country of birth is from, where their nationality is. That is the big problem. And if we look at the countries that he wants to put that travel ban on, those are the countries that we're having a lot of terrorists come out from at the moment. So this is why Trump is trying to put this in office. But it would limit the amount of people who can come over. That doesn't mean that the people who are already inside, the Muslims who are inside from those locations, if I think one of them was Yemen, that he ended up saying you couldn't, that was put on the travel ban list. That doesn't mean that people who are from Yemen inside America are going to get sent back. So they can't claim that. What's also more concerning is the fact that the Canadian government, despite all this talk about how people across the border will be arrested, well, the RCMP has already said how they barely hold the people themselves. They'll hold them for maybe 24 hours, and once they go through that, they are entitled to many of the rights that we Canadians are. Healthcare, education, blah, 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 blah. And they're not arresting people and turning back people who have been found with criminal records. In fact, very, very, very few people have actually been returned to America when they've crossed the border into Canada. And the main problem with this is we're going to see irreparable damage that if Trudeau doesn't get a handle on this soon, we're going to have irreparable damage that is done inside Canada. We're just going to have all these people that have crossed over who are going to be living off the system. And on top of this, actually, one thing I am happy to see is finally, finally the media is saying what I have been saying for months now. Since pretty much right off the start, right as this border crisis happened, and we were starting to see that they were building tents for the people over there, is that we were building refugee camps. I call them slums, you know? We were building slums on our border. Well, now we've officially, at least the media is starting to recognize that this is pretty much a refugee camp. Now, you got the two sides. You got the more conservative news that is talking about how it's... You got the more conservative news, which is talking about how it is like a refugee camp, and then you have the more left-leaning news, the liberal news, that is talking about, yeah, they're making that reference, but then they're trying to downplay the whole situation. So I am at least glad to see that people are starting to recognize this, because so far, the damage control that the media has been on in this whole situation has not gone over well. They tried to attack anybody that called it illegal crossings rather than irregular crossing. Talk about the damage that those people are doing. People such as myself calling illegal crossings, because that's exactly what they are. So that didn't work out so well, and now they're starting to recognize certain things, but they're still trying to downplay the situation. They're trying to say, they tried to pretend for a while that not that many are crossing, or it's not that big of a deal. Meanwhile, it kept getting worse and worse. They're trying to suggest that it's not really a slum, it's not really a refugee camp. Now they're starting to admit it. The next step is going to be admit how much these people live off the system. But I don't want to focus too long on the border situation, just because it is, we've been talking about it a lot lately, so I don't want to focus too much on it, because I've also probably said just about everything I can say on the matter at the moment. But the new thing that's been popping up has been about how this MP from the NDP, Erin Weir, has been thrown out of the NDP caucus. And, pretty much he has been, there we go. Yeah, he's been thrown out of the NDP caucus because back at the beginning of the year, about February, he's been under investigation for, I guess sexual harassment is what it's all about. And they're pretty much saying that he has made several female MPs, other ones, make him feel uncomfortable, and he's made advances against them that they didn't appreciate. So after some investigation, and then after Erin Weir has spoken out about this whole, what he believes about this investigation, how it's flawed, Jagmeet Singh decided to toss him from the caucus. So he's been completely expelled from the caucus. Now, despite this, there's a lot that still doesn't make sense in this whole situation. There's a lot that has been overplayed, and his actions did not match the consequences. He should not have been thrown out because nothing that he did actually violated the rules, the political rules or the party rules, and that would, even if some of his actions were considered inappropriate, nothing that he did could actually get him thrown out of this caucus. So, as we take a look into it, some of the problems that we've had with this investigation is that it said there was no complaint from anyone over whom Weir had any authority. So that's number one, because one of the big ones when they talk about politics is how it's, especially when they're talking about a male MP who's committed sexual assault, is the idea that it's a powerful man using their authority to intimidate a woman to do what they want. But this was not the situation at all in this. Because, as they've stated here, he had no authority over these people. Indeed, the only specific complaint upheld by the report came from a former staff member in the NDP leader's office who had asserted authority over Weir. She made her complaint public earlier this week. As we move on, it says other complaints were presented without names, date, places, or detailed descriptions of alleged activity. And as we even continue a little farther down, Weir says, this lack of basic information made it impossible to properly respond and fell far short of what would have been required by the House of Commons anti-harassment policy. So we're already starting to see the problems that is facing Weir, and then it gets even worse than that, actually. As we move on, it says, without upholding any particular sexual harassment complaint, the investigator made a general finding of sexual harassment that Weir had probably sat or stood too close to people at social events and engaged them in conversation more than they wished to speak with him. Weir said on the subject, he said, it became clear that I sometimes am slow to pick up on social cues. The investigator noted that Weir ceased his advances when a complainant stated that she was not interested and that the incidents that gave rise to these findings fall on the less serious end of the spectrum. So we've gotten to the point where talking to someone when it's inappropriate is enough to get someone kicked out of politics now. Because this is all that Weir is guilty of. He's talking about how he stood too close to them, or spoke to them when they didn't wish to speak with them. Many have also stated that people in this situation have also stated that he ignored their social cues, their nonverbal social cues. Now, this is something I am sick and tired of hearing, is people who talk about nobody recognized my nonverbal cues. Well, people give off nonverbal cues all the frickin' time. And we don't, and people will pick up on them, people won't pick up on them. It just depends. Some people, whether it's in the situation, they're not good at picking up on social cues. Others are just bad in general at picking up social cues. But now people are trying to say that if people don't recognize how they're feeling when they don't speak up, then that's perfectly acceptable to hit them with some sort of harassment, or even at best a sexual harassment case. Because even in this, it even stated that that Weir stopped. Whenever he was told that they were not interested, Weir stopped his approach. So he was clearly just unaware of what his actions were doing. As we move on, it said, here's a message from Jagmeet Singh, who ended up saying, it was found that Mr. Weir failed to read nonverbal cues in social situations, that his behavior resulted in significant negative impact on the complainants. The report found that when Mr. Weir was told his advances were unwanted, he stopped. So this wasn't like he was trying to exert his authority over the complainant. It's not like he was actually actually going out of his way to ignore her and then try and make his advances on him. It was that he was unaware, and then he was told to stop. I don't know what more this guy could have done. If you are unaware of your actions are inappropriate, but then are told that your actions are inappropriate and stop, what more can you do in that situation? In fact, one experiment I've ran a few times, not because of this situation, but in the past when I've heard about these nonverbal social cues. One thing I've done when I've been talking to somebody or debating them, whichever it happens to be, is I'll sit there and I'll give them a bunch of nonverbal cues. Cross my arms, tap my fingers, maybe give them a bit of a dirty look, and just wait. And I'll wait, and I'll wait, and I'll wait. And then when they're done talking, I'll simply ask them, did you pick up on my nonverbal cues? Most of the time I've done that, nobody ever notices. Even though I point them out right after, I say, got my arms crossed, which is pretty universally universal when it's not an open stance, which, when you're trying to talk to someone, you want to present to them with an open stance. If you come in with your arms crossed, it gives off a nonverbal cue that you're not impressed, or you're annoyed, or one emotion or the other. So this gives off a negative nonverbal cue. Many times it's a nonverbal cue that people are unhappy or they don't want the conversation to continue. Drumming your fingers, very commonly known for when you're impatient. That's what you do. You sit there, you drum your fingers, or you tap your foot just because you're impatient. Giving somebody a dirty look, well, what more obvious thing can you give somebody aside for telling them that you're unhappy, aside for sitting there giving them a dirty look? So when most of these people don't pick up on that, my point is made is that the idea of a nonverbal cue is actually stupid. If you're going to hold on to that as the main idea, as your main defense, and say, well, I didn't say anything, I didn't speak up, but I gave him a bunch of nonverbal cues, well, then in my opinion, that's unacceptable because you didn't speak up. You did not make your intentions very obvious. You simply sat there and maybe crossed your hands or did something or the other, and then you bitched, moaned, and whined when somebody didn't recognize your personal verbal cues. And everybody has something a little bit different. Not all verbal cues are as obvious as crossing your arms or drumming your fingers. Some people, it's the way they stand. Some people, it's the fact they won't look at you when you're talking to them. Everybody has something a little bit different. So the fact that there's a few nonverbal cues that are standard, but the fact that there are so many that are, well, just subjective to the individual person, that's just the way their personality is, the way that they uphold themselves. So you can't always guarantee that somebody's going to pick up on the nonverbal cues. Now, speaking up and telling somebody directly, that is the most direct way to let them know how you feel. So if you're in a situation where you're uncomfortable, but you're not going to tell the person to back off or you know what, stop now, then you really can't sit there and be too upset when somebody doesn't recognize your nonverbal cues, when somebody doesn't recognize that you're unhappy. This also is very concerning. The fact that there's not enough here to get the guy thrown out of caucus. Now, what ended up doing it at the end, that eventually got him thrown out, was the fact that he was speaking up. So Jagmeet Singh said at first that he was willing to work with the NDP and rectify the situation, his behavior, and then the way he spoke out it showed him that he wasn't prepared to work on his behavior and solve the situation, so he decided that it was time to kick him out. But the other thing, too, that I find is important on here, which I did kind of forgot to bring up, is that the information, hold on, just quick, I'll just show it to you. Oop, wrong one. There we go. It says, Weir said, the information comes not from the target of the behavior, but from a third party, another NDP MP who was made aware of the situation. So this is, once again, a third-party situation, because this is also something that happened in the Patrick Brown case that I thought was a little weird, was the fact that Lisa McLeod was a third party who spoke forward. Now, in that situation, though, what was a little more suspicious about her situation was the fact that she didn't go to any official campaign chairman. She didn't go to anybody of authority. But she told her friend, who is a volunteer for the Conservative Party and was supposed to run Patrick Brown's war room during the June 7th election. So this is who she ended up telling, and then just whenever there's a third party that speaks up, it always immediately kind of puts a red flag up for me, just because why is not the person who is the victim coming forward? I'm sure there are always reasons why people are nervous to come forward in these situations. Like, I know that there are women who feel they won't be believed, or, they're embarrassed to come forward, that they'd have to make public this situation. But if you're going to have somebody else speak for you, then it waters down whatever you want to say or whatever you're trying to report. And this is not just strictly for this situation or for sexual harassment cases or in anything. But if you've ever had somebody, like, say, a mutual friend who's come to you and talked to you about how another friend's upset at you because your other friend didn't have the balls or something to come out and talk about it, it waters everything down because the person couldn't come forward to speak about it directly. And also looks a little bit suspicious, I find, in many situations when a third party comes forward. Because a lot of times when a third party person comes forward, they're coming forward without the knowledge of the main person affected. They'll come forward and try and take it upon themselves to do the right thing, regardless of what the actual victim in this situation wants. So that's kind of important. But all in all, like, as we always stated, there's not enough here, not enough evidence to get him kicked out due to the House of Commons anti-harassment policies. So why is this MP getting kicked out then? Why has he been actually thrown out of the caucus despite this? Well, he's starting to claim, actually, was one thing that in his claims that people were wondering about, his position, is that he's talked about how he doesn't feel that this was actually have anything to do with the complaint himself. Erin Weir believes that this is some sort of payback to him against him. Hold on, let me find it. So, what he is saying is Weir suggested that the harassment complaint was payback for his decision to engage in debate in the party leadership considered contentious. In a release, he said that the caucus chair Charlie Angus and the federal leader Tom Mulcair banned him from question period for several months as punishment for having tried to raise the issue. And this had to do with the government's safeguard local jobs, and help reduce global emissions, because he wanted to implement a carbon levy on imports from other countries than if they didn't put enough, if they didn't do enough to implement a carbon tax. Which, first of all, I'm actually going to say this is a terrible idea by Erin Weir, because who the hell is going to trade for you if you're then going to put a tariff on top of it, on top of their product, because they don't have carbon credits, or they don't have a carbon tax? If anything, they're just going to find somebody else who doesn't care, and they'll sell to them. So that's actually going to cause more damage to our imports. So this was already a terrible idea. But the idea of Parliament, the idea of our democracy, is that it's supposed to be an open format. It's supposed to be where people can come in and debate their ideas, present their ideas, even if it goes against even the party's norm. But this has been proven, first by the Liberal Party, and now again by the NDP underneath Jagmeet Singh, that you do not go against the flow. You do not ever vote out of line, because this has already been done. This is already, Jagmeet Singh has already punished another MP for this, David Christopherson, because he was when this one was for the Liberal Summer Jobs Program, the grants that everyone was freaking out about, because he said that if you're a pro-life group, you cannot receive government funding. So, despite this, the NDP voted alongside the Liberals, and David Christopherson, despite the fact he was told to stay the course, to vote in tandem with the rest, he decided that he wasn't, because he saw this as a violation of individual rights, of individuals to make their decisions. So he was then thrown off his committee chair. Let's see if we can say that. See where it is. He was deputy chair of the Powerful Procedure and House Affairs Committee. So he ended up having that stripped from him. Now, once that ended up happening, Jagmeet Singh got a lot of criticism, both from non-NDP Canadians, but also even members of their party, because he was being punished for speaking his own mind. David Christopherson, despite this, was not allowed to vote the way he believed. And this showed how the left-wing parties are ruling their parties with an iron fist. This is part of the reason I don't like Jagmeet Singh, along with just a lot of the other stuff that he wants to implement. It's that I've seen this, that he talks about openness, love, accountability, and freedom, blah, 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 blah. But my God, if you ever go against the guy, he will tear you the fuck down. And this whole situation just goes back to, it brings me back to what I said when everything was going out with Patrick Brown, which I said that this was the end of due process in Canada. Now, of course, it's not like due process was dead that I was saying. It's not like nobody had due process at this point. But what we were starting to see is that people were toying with the idea that there shouldn't be due process in politics. This article came out a few days after the Patrick Brown incident broke, and I've managed to pull it up here on Press Reader, and as we can see right here, top left, right to due process doesn't apply in politics. Criminality shouldn't be the standard for judging elected officials, says Chris Selly, and that was from the Ottawa Citizen on the 27th of January, 2018. And I said then, and I'll say again now, if our elected officials, the ones who make the laws, really the elites of our country and the ones who want to maintain power, if this sort of right is being stripped from them, the right to due process, what chance do the rest of us have? Because the elites and the powerful, the ones in charge, always want to retain that power. They will always stack the deck in their favor to give themselves a little bit more of an advantage than the average citizen out there. So if they are not given the rights to due process, why would they accept a right being taken away from them that the rest of the citizenry has? Why would everyone else be allowed to have due process if they don't have due process? And quite simply, they wouldn't. They wouldn't allow the right to due process, and it would happen slowly. I mean, it's not like they're just going to one day come out and say, all right, no more due process, but it'll be an event in public where then people are going to start debating the idea, should we even have due process? And then the government will start, debating the idea, sort of coming up with it over the course of a few years. Then they'll find a reason to start taking away, whether in one situation or another. My guess, if they were to do this, they would take it away in sexual harassment case, in rape cases. There would be no due process, because if we're talking about where men don't have much due process, then that would be probably the largest one, is when it comes to either divorce court or when it comes to sexual harassment. There is very little in the way of due process as it stands. Very little in believing that somebody is innocent, they are innocent until proven guilty. There is none of that, even though this is what our whole society is supposed to stand on: the right to remain innocent until you are proven guilty. So as I watch this, and I watch what's happening with Erin Weir right now, I watch as this man who is not violated really that much. This should be able to be solved with a simple, I'm sorry, go up to them and be like, listen, I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. I'm sorry I did that, or I made you feel uncomfortable in this situation. That's it. And then that should be it. But instead, he's been put underneath investigation for the last 3 months, and now he's been officially kicked out of his caucus. And some of it, too, are not really, in my opinion, maybe some people have feel differently about it, but personally, I don't even think some of this stuff is that bad. For instance, let's see. Here we go. So he says, CBC News has learned of a third-party investigation has revealed multiple harassment complaints against NDP MP Erin Weir. One complainant told CBC News that Weir spoke to her in an angry and belligerent way and that she felt physically intimidated. Well, so he spoke to her angrily and belligerent. People get angry all the frickin' time. And you know what? I have done that, where I've been at work and gotten angry, not necessarily at somebody, but more of the situation. You start yelling, getting belligerent. It has happened to me, and I've also been on the receiving end of that with people. It's actually quite normal for some people to reach their breaking point and then start screaming and yelling. But the one thing that I will always push back against is that just because somebody gets angry and starts yelling or something, that means that the person on the receiving end is felt physically intimidated, like they're going to get attacked. Just because somebody's angry doesn't mean they're going to attack you. In fact, very rarely does that actually happen. Yes, of course, it absolutely happens. But how many times have you had an interaction with somebody where it's angry, where no physical violence comes out of it? Most of the time. And especially if we're talking about not in public, but even in certain areas like the workplace, that's going to happen even less because there's things that people have to lose. For instance, if somebody is actually going to attack a coworker, well, if they have a family depending on them and they don't have extra money to make ends meet, do you really think they're going to sacrifice their family's standard of living and their income to attack someone because they're angry? That doesn't make sense to me. And why would somebody in such a public position of power even think about attacking someone like that, especially in what seems to be a more public area, or at least in the workplace, I should say, because seems to all take place in the workplace. So for me, just this idea that she felt physically intimidated because he got mad is a load of crap to me. And I've seen that too at work. I've seen people who've gotten angry at something, and then somebody has made a complaint. Actually, one time I saw at my workplace is somebody got angry at the machines and was like yelling at the machines with the place I used to work with. And then a coworker went and complained that she felt physically intimidated by him because he was angry at the machines, because he was yelling at the machines that kept breaking down. And then for some reason, this woman felt physically intimidated by this guy. It didn't make sense then, and it doesn't make sense to me now. Unless they are showing an actual unless they are presenting themselves as possibly being a danger in that way, unless they are presenting themselves up front, they are trying to corner you, and they're physically trying to make themselves bigger, and then even starting to make some threats, just the idea of being angry, and that means that constitute physical intimidation, is a complete load of crap. So it is quite possible that maybe Erin Weir did something wrong, but everything that I'm seeing right now doesn't pertain to any of this. Everything I'm seeing right now is just that he didn't recognize some social cues, stood maybe a little too close to some people, and talked to them when they didn't want to, or maybe in certain ways. And then this one situation where he got angry. But that's not enough. It shouldn't be enough to kick someone out of office, but apparently it is. And this is why I still feel that we have reached the end of due process. Because here's another man that goes down with very little evidence. The one thing that I do hope, though, is that Patrick Brown is suing CTV and also his the people who have accused him of the sexual harassment back, I guess it was like 10 years ago now that they were claiming that it happened. He's suing them, and I hope that Patrick Brown wins the lawsuit, because then it can help, number one, set a precedence for next time, and number two, it can also maybe make people in the media think again about the way they present these sort of situations. If they now can face some sort of repercussions for destroying someone's life when there's not enough evidence to support it, by doing this, by constantly bringing things up and constantly reporting on. I mean, there's been a absolute crap ton of articles around Erin Weir since this whole situation has gone out. A crap ton. Now, if this turns out that this guy is pretty much turns out to be nothing, it's a nothing burger, then we're going to have the media that have pounded this guy for like a week or more to keep telling the story over and over again of how he's a harasser and how he sexually harassed women. And it just turns out that it's a whole nothing burger. Then I would like to see them get sued too. I would like to see some sort of repercussion against the media, because when situations like this happen, it brings me back to, I don't know if Dave Rubin was the first one to coin this term, but I know he was the first one that I heard use the term, which is journalistic hitmen. Is that their idea is just to tear down the people that they report on, because it makes for good news. It makes for viewership. Really, it's not so much about reporting as it is to cause the drama in order to destroy someone's reputation, which happened to Patrick Brown, regardless of your feelings on Patrick Brown, I think people should be defensive of him. This is actually one problem I had with a couple people that I have heard, a couple YouTubers even, that were talking about how they don't give a shit that Patrick Brown was accused of this. They're just happy that he's out of office because they didn't like him as a politician. And this is the wrong attitude to take, because if you're just going to say, I don't care that this guy I don't like is getting slandered and facing possibly criminal charges based on a lie, then what reason do people have to care if you end up on the receiving end of that? And because there's people who would say that too. Many of these YouTubers that I see are that I've talked about. Actually, I shouldn't say many. There's been one or two that, when I'm talking YouTubers, I've seen many people on social media that have said this too. But when we're talking about these YouTubers, these are right-wing YouTubers. These are conservative YouTubers. So there's plenty of left-wing people that would say, I don't give a shit whether this person do it. I'm just glad that they've been taken down a notch. So this has been my problem with it. And actually, I guess going a little off topic, but during the Count Dankula case, this is my problem I had with JF on Warski Live, is the fact that he didn't give a shit that Count Dankula was going to prison and was like really the poster child of a free speech case at that moment. The fact that Count Dankula had said some mean things to JF in the past and about his family was enough for him to not even care. It was enough for him to watch Count Dankula go to prison. So, in a lot of ways, I think if you're not willing to stand up for people, if you're going to let personal reasons get in the way for standing up for certain people just because you don't like them, then you don't really deserve the protection either. So, for instance, I defended JF when he was on Warski Live, when people were talking about how he was trying to do a pregnancy plot, and he was trying to impregnate women, when all he wanted to do, he was having relationships with women where he told them, I want to have children. So it was really nothing to it. But if I had problems with JF, would that mean that I would, if I had a problem with JF and didn't like him personally, would that mean that I should be happy that he is getting slandered this way and that it's going to affect more men in the future simply because I didn't like JF? No. So these are my problems with people who have this sort of idea, is that people will say that, well, it doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter. It does matter, because any one of us can be dragged down. And actually, I guess all this talk that I did about the summer job program is a good transition into our next little bit, because so as we know, the controversies around the summer jobs program was the fact that no pro-life groups were allowed this funding, because Justin Trudeau, you know, the king feminist, was saying that that abortion is a women's right issue, and that anybody who doesn't support women's rights will not receive the government funding. Well, apparently if you are pro-life, then and against women, you are against women's rights and should not ever have this governmental funding. But if you are a Muslim extremist who has advocated for violence, who have advocated literally against gay people, and I don't mean just saying like, I think it's wrong, but actually saying they are an abomination, they are cockroaches, then apparently you have every right to receive government funding. Now, these are two different articles, two different reports that came out from the same woman. It came out from Candace Malcolm, and Candace Malcolm, in my opinion, does a great freaking job. I like Candace Malcolm. I think she is a shining star among journalists these days, because she has done great reporting when it comes to Trudeau. She's done great reporting on the border wall crisis. In fact, I credit her with a lot of the breaking information on Trudeau that we receive. I think a lot of it has been her single-handedly. So I have a lot of respect for the woman. And once again, she is breaking through Justin Trudeau's bullshit. So, oh crap. 1 second. There we go. So, as we can see here, underneath the summer jobs grant, both the Canadian Arab Federation and the Anatolia Islamic Center have been approved for federal funding in 2018. In 2009, the Canadian Arab Federation was defunded over the group's extremist and support for terrorist groups. Terrorist groups. And that was during the Harper years where they defunded them. Now the CAF, it even states how they tried to get that overruled. However, that didn't work, and they ended up getting their funding cut. Now we go over to the Anatolia Islamic Center, has a history of controversy. The center's imam made headlines in 2013 for anti-gay comments caught on tape. Imam Mustafa Khattab, he ended up telling a room of young students that being gay is like having a disease that requires a special treatment. Ooh, what kind of special treatment are you talking there about, Imam? Are you talking about throwing them off fucking roofs like we saw ISIS doing? Is that what you want to do? Oh, no. How about a little bit of beheading? I'm sure that's probably much more up your alley, isn't it, Imam Mustafa? But you love to see them get their fucking heads chopped off or thrown off a fucking building. Seems to go along with a lot of his barbaric beliefs. And then we also had the Muslim Association of Canada. And in 2015, the QMI news agency obtained an RCMP search warrant that linked the MAC headquarters in Mississauga to the International Relief Fund for the Affliction of Needy Canada, a banned terrorist organization with financial ties to Hamas. Oh man, I've actually begun to lose track how many terrorists and terrorist groups are associated with Trudeau's Liberal government. We have the individual terrorists that have actually been present with Trudeau. We can talk about Omar Khadr. We've also have several others that since the Omar Khadr payout have been they are now trying to sue the government for whatever reason. I know one of them is trying to sue the government because he also was held in Guantanamo Bay, and probably making the same claim that Omar Khadr did, is that the Canadian government did nothing to help him. We have Joshua Boyle, which within 2 months of returning to Canada committed something like 30 different fucking crimes, including sexual assault and, all sorts of abuse. I'm pretty sure most of it was probably against his wife and kids. We have him literally importing ISIS fighters and then wanting to put them through a reprogramming, like a reintroduction program where they get like coloring books and something and told how their ideas are mean, which has more funding based around research than action, and has also never been tried by another country or group or anything like this before, so there's no evidence to even support that it'll work. And now we literally have Justin Trudeau giving government money, taxpayer money, to Islamic terrorist groups. Oh, and I guess I already mentioned it on this podcast, like literally today, is that they're also not turning around any of the migrants at our border who have criminal records. The ones that we have found that have criminal records, we're not turning them around. So welcome to Canada. This is what Trudeau is doing to us. He's welcoming criminals and terrorists into our country. These sort of actions that Trudeau does, it really does fuel the fringe groups that then want to take action against the government to a more extreme. Literally anti-government groups that would be prepared to pick up arms against the government. In my opinion, he's just fueling this sort of sentiment in Canada. He's actually being one of the main causes of what could potentially be homegrown terrorists in the future. I mean, maybe I mentioned before, I'm a much more cynical person, even for my younger age. I usually tend to think that things are going to end up on the worst end of the spectrum than the positive end of the spectrum. So maybe I'm just being over dramatic. And I don't believe when I say this that these sort of groups would be homegrown terrorists as in going after the average Canadian, but I could see some homegrown terrorists that would then try and make attacks against government targets. It wouldn't be too dissimilar to what we saw during the FLQ crisis during Pierre Elliott Trudeau's watch, where Quebec nationalists, they ended up kidnapping a sitting MP and ended up murdering him. And during that time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the first prime minister to restrict Canadian rights and freedoms because of this crisis. So I could see that Justin Trudeau could give rise to the sort of fringe groups that would be willing to commit and act like this simply because they feel that he doesn't speak for the Canadian people and that he's not actively trying to defend the Canadian people. And I don't think any person out there could actually pull up an example of Trudeau sticking up for the Canadian people. In fact, time and time and time again, he's willing to stick up for everybody but the Canadian people. He takes every opportunity to trash Canada as a society, and pretty much talking about how racist, homophobic, and sexist the entire culture is. But then at the same time, he wants to import a bunch of people to what he sees as a sexist, racist culture. So this is the part I don't understand about his ideas, where it logically does not make sense. Although it makes sense if he wants them for voting, which really seems to be the most... Really, that's the only option I could see for why Trudeau is doing what he is doing, is for more votes. I think every episode that I come on and start talking about this shit, I think I actually grow a little bit more pessimistic, and I actually fear a little bit more for our future. I think I've already said it today that Justin Trudeau is doing irreparable damage to our society, and there's nothing right now to stop him. We cannot stop him or change him because he has that majority government. And at the same time, we can't push for a vote of no confidence because we don't have the numbers. When Trudeau holds his cabinet with an iron fist, that means that no Liberal MPs are going to turn on him. Any ones that have just like the NDP member of Parliament, David Christopherson, just like him, they get punished. It's happened time and time and time again. We've heard a few different stories. There was one where during the Bill C-71, which was the gun control legislation, a Liberal MP ended up speaking up and thinking that maybe it's unnecessary, maybe they're going too far, and Justin Trudeau castrated him in front of everyone in that meeting. Now we have another MP, Sims, who did not vote in tandem with the Liberals, and he has been punished because of this. So the problem is even if the Conservatives, the NDP, and like the one Green member or whatever that are sitting in the House of Commons, even if they wanted and all of them agreed to vote positively for a motion of non-confidence, it wouldn't matter because we still needed Liberal MPs in order to get the appropriate numbers in order to pull that through. So there's nothing we can even do right now. The only thing I think we can do is try right now. If anyone's got a better idea, please leave it in the comments below and let me know. But right now, the only thing I can think of is trying to expose as many people to what Justin Trudeau is doing. And we need to get as many people active as possible against what he wants to do. I know that Faith Goldie was planning, at least in a few weeks or something, a protest down at the border for everything that's going on. Personally, I think she's going to the wrong area. I do agree with a protest at the border, just to let everyone in the area know how unhappy the Canadian citizens are. But this has to be done in a much more public area, it needs to be done on Parliament Hill. This sort of protest needs to be done in Parliament Hill and at city halls all across different cities and towns across Canada. This one rally is not going to do it. One protest at the border is not going to do anything to change this. I mean, the people who come in, they'll see the protest, but the next day, the next group of people, the next group of asylum seekers, of illegal border crossers that come in, they won't see that protest. So it's not going to make a big difference. We need to let our government know that we are unhappy. We need to let the government know that they need to do something now. And again, they can. All they have to do is change all of Canada's official borders, the entire length of our border, to an official border crossing, which we have every right to do. It would not be hard to do. But Justin Trudeau doesn't want to do it. Instead, he is delaying it and using every single excuse to blame everybody else but himself. Blaming Harper, blaming the Conservatives, blaming Trump. Like, where else can he go after this? Who else can he blame after this? I guess my biggest fear, too, is just how fast Canadians seem to forget. Because even though it's just been a few months since the India trip, many Canadians are already forgetting about it. So much of Justin Trudeau's popularity sunk during that trip. But at least according to new Ipsos polls, which maybe they're over-exaggerating or maybe their demographics weren't really representative of the entire country, but they are suggesting that the Liberals at the moment have once again tied the Conservatives for popularity. With everything that Justin Trudeau does, this should be unacceptable. But you know what? When the hell does our media even really like reporting on what Justin Trudeau does badly too much? There seems to be specific people, specific news agencies that are focusing on this. Toronto Sun, I know, has no love for Trudeau, and many of the people there have no love for Trudeau. But all in all, our media does not really report much on the scandals of Trudeau or how bad the stuff that Trudeau goes, how greatly it can affect each Canadian. In fact, they seem to do the opposite, and they try and downplay everything that he does. So that's my real problem, is that I feel like Canadians forget, and then they're sticking too much with the official narrative that comes from our media and that comes from our government, because again, polls suggested that most Canadians are actually trusting of the government and official news and information and official information outlets. So information that comes from the government, information that comes from our mainstream media, they still trust it a fair amount. And because of this, not a lot of people anyway, except for the ones who pay attention, see how bad we're being screwed by Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada. I still see a strong group of supporters online that will be truly anti-Trudeau. They will never, ever, ever be on Trudeau's side. Same as me. I will never, ever be on Trudeau's side. But as it stands, this seems to be a minority, and the average Canadian seems to not take a lot of notice into the dangers of the policies that Justin Trudeau is presenting. And all we need to see for all you really need to take a look at for see how bad of a policies he puts forward are the debt and the budget. Because our debt has skyrocketed under Trudeau, and now the budget, especially in 2018, they're already stating that, actually, it's funny, this is also in the federal budget, but also the Ontario budget. In Ontario, we were promised something like a $5 billion deficit or something, maybe a little bit more. No, it's like double that. It's going to be at least double that from what Kathleen Wynne wants to introduce. And a lot of the same thing. Despite the fact we were told there's about an $18.5 billion deficit in the 2018 budget, we are hearing now that the deficit is actually going to be much bigger than that. So this is the legacy of Justin Trudeau. He's going to leave a bunch of debt for us and our children, and then he's importing a bunch of people who will live off the system, draining it even further. And if you've been in a hospital lately, we can't exactly afford the strain on our medical industry. The doctors and the nurses, they're already pushed to their extent. They can't take any more. They're burnt out. But we're just going to keep offering bring in more and more people. In the future, Justin Trudeau will be the perfect example as to why you need to question your government and why you should not trust the Liberal government. Well, thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. My name's Adrian Lloyd. This is Just My Stupid Opinion. I'll see you all soon.